We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
G'day and welcome to another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. And to help us prove that again today is Connor Beaton. Now, Connor is a speaker, coach, and founder of Man Talks, a global community and a top-ranked podcast helping men and women face their inner darkness and unlock their true potential. Now, drawing from over a decade of experience and innovative methodologies like somatic therapy and transformative breath work, Connor guides people to overcome self-sabotage, deepen relationships, and achieve personal mastery. Now, I'm going to have links in the show notes to his podcast and other social media channels that I highly recommend you check out for positive and healthy male content. Now, those who follow me, you know I share his stuff like minimum 2-3 times a week because it's just that good. So Connor, mate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, and also for those of you joining us live, I want to apologize by the state of my face that you're looking at right now. My daughter brought home conjunctivitis, which is more socially known as the pink eye. In my case, it's both eyes. So that's just something we're dealing with. For those listening, lucky you.
The double whammy, man. The double whammy. She got you good.
She got me. I got. And, you know, you're sharing about how your kids, like daycares, have been going through it this year. And it's like, man, daycares are feral.
You can't escape it, man. The kids are they're like lovable germ bags, you know? Yeah. And my son right now I have a 3.5-year-old boy and a 3.5 month old girl. I guess she's 4 months old next week.
Congratulations.
And my boy is just constantly like touching her face and kissing her face and coughing in her face. And I'm like, bro, could you just back off of her a little bit? It was funny the other day. He's like, Dad, I love her face. And I'm like, I can tell, buddy, like you won't stop coughing in her face. I'm like, this poor baby, her immune system is going to be good just from my son, dude, you know, coughing directly into her mouth.
Yeah, exactly. Herd immunity. The Beaton household, you're already getting your herd immunity.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll be changing my daughter and I just watch her like put her hand between her legs and just like smack
on her face.
I'm like,
yep.
Oh, right.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, mate, let's dive in. So you've been in and around men's work for, you know, a while now, just a little bit over a decade. So I want to ask you, like, with the discussions you're having with other people in this space and what you're witnessing with people that you're working with, how have the conversations around men's mental health, men's issues, how have they shifted over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think amongst men, it's changed quite a bit. You know, I think it's become much less stigmatized, much more socially acceptable. You know, men going to therapy or just talking to one another about stuff that's going on in their life. That's all become much more normalized. I remember when I started Man Talks in Vancouver back in like 2015. I think in 2014, 2015, we had the first event. And it was really interesting because there was a lot of, you know, hate online. There was a lot of commentary of like, why do men need this? Men already have all the spaces. You know, what good is this going to do? And it was from both sides. It was like men and women alike were just like, this is ridiculous. But I kind of had a sense, and I remember a couple years into it, one of my buddies who ran a pretty successful tech company, SEO company out of Vancouver, who initially had told me, please, dear Lord, do not call it Man Talks. And I was like, I promise you it will work. I promise you. I really love this sort of like direct marketing style, right? Like just name it what it is. You know, like I wrote a book called Men's Work. You know, it's like unbelievable that nobody had wrote a book called Men's Work in the past. It's like Men's Work has been around for 50, 60 years and no one's written a book called Men's Work. So I wrote a book called Men's Work. But anyway, I think, you know, over time, it's become much more socially acceptable for men to have these types of conversations, to talk about the challenges that they're facing socially, relationally, interpersonally, inside of themselves, psychologically. And yeah, I remember having a conversation with my buddy when I was like 2 years in, and I said, we're at the very beginning of a wave forming that will be modern men's work. And I think that what we're seeing now is that that wave is growing. More and more men are seeking out support, I mean, the hashtag men's coach wasn't a thing when I started Man Talks. Like, that didn't exist at all on any social media platform. And now there's, tens of thousands of men's coaches. And I think a lot of guys are entering into these conversations because they need support, because it is becoming increasingly more and more challenging to be a man within our society, to feel valued as a man within our culture, to feel like you have a place as a man within our society, to be able to provide in the ways that a lot of men want to for their families, and to not feel like you aren't the entire problem for everything that's happening in the world right now, which is, for some men, that's really how they feel, that they are the center of the problem, pretty much regardless of what it is. And so I think that it's changing quite a bit. I think we still have a long ways to go. So I'll pause there.
So you said you were noticing the wave forming 2014, 2015. What were the signs that you were noticing that kind of indicated that it was starting to pick up?
I mean, Jordan Peterson was a big part of it. Love him or hate him, like what he says or not like what he says. He really represented the archetypal father for a lot of men. And the sort of archetypal father that was missing within our culture. I noticed it because I was putting on these events that were called Man Talks, and we were, on a monthly basis, I was seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come out to these events. And I was doing them all over North America. And there was just a ton of guys coming out saying, I need support, I need help. And I think the social conversation through mainstream media, on social media, started to shift with regards to some of the challenges that men were facing. You started to hear more people talking about male suicide rates, men dropping out of high school, fatherless households. One in four kids are going to grow up without a father present in the household. And that disproportionately affects young boys. We have the data on this. The research is very, very clear that young boys fare exponentially worse than young girls when there isn't a father present. So you started to see all these things. Go ahead.
We had Warren, sorry to jump in, but we had Warren Farrell on the show.
Nice.
A number of episodes ago to talk about the dad crisis, and it's striking.
Yeah.
Very striking. So we can't deny that anymore. People think it's a mute talking point, but it is empirically contributing to the challenges faced by boys and men, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that as women have become more and more socially prosperous, culturally powerful, men feel, a lot of men feel like they're in the background. And I think a lot of those men, they go online to talk about those types of things, the challenges that they've faced in going through a divorce, how the court system was, largely against them. I think men started to have these social conversations largely in the background, right, on subreddits and Facebook community groups. And it was like, hey, I'm struggling in this way. I'm going through this challenge. And they were looking for other men that were going through them. And I think, social media, as detrimental as it's been in a lot of ways, provided an access point for men to kind of come together and coalesce and say, hey, I'm dealing with the exact same thing. And I just went through that divorce, or, I just lost my father to cancer, or I just got diagnosed with testicular cancer, and here's how I've gone through it. And, men who had largely become more and more isolated started to connect in the digital reality. And I think that that's sort of brought quote unquote men's work to the forefront and sort of change the game. So I think there's a number of things that have contributed to it.
So we're seeing that momentum now. Like, we're starting to really see it, and it hasn't gone away. right? That's what's been really cool is it's the conversations are still happening. And for all those that may have a challenge with men getting the help that they need, or even accepting the fact that men do need help, because because their inherent privileges, and if people believe in the patriarchy and any of those models of power, I can see why someone sits there and goes like, no, they don't need a leg up. If anything, they need to step down. But there's almost this zero sum thinking that really locks people into this kind of binary of, if women prosper, men are going to decline. If men start getting advantages, women are going to go back into the dark ages. And all of a sudden it's going to be, there's got to be a hot meal on the table by the time hubby comes home from work. And it's just not the case. It can be a both and.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest challenge. I mean, you have people like Scott Galloway and Richard Reeves, who wrote Of Boys and Men, who I had on my show. I've had both of those men on my show. You've got George from the Tin Men, who puts out some great content. But I think one of the major challenges is that as soon as you start to talk about men's issues, period, whether they're men's, the astronomical rate of men that are dropping out of college or aren't even bothering to go to college, right? I mean, we've inversed what was happening in the 60s, where there was two men graduating for every one woman in the 60s. And now we're on the precipice of that being inverse, where two women are going to be graduating from college for every one man. And so, we are disproportionately creating men that are not really viable mates for a lot of women, for a number of reasons, which we could talk about. But the big challenge that starts to happen, and has the major resistance, has been that to talk about men's issues is automatically gets this reaction from mainstream media, from women, from sometimes feminists, from other men as well, that to talk about men's issues is to deny women's issues, which is simply not the case. I mean, that's preposterous. It's like, if you're talking about the sun, it means that you don't give a crap about the moon. It's like, well, that's just a false equivalency. It's not real, And so we can talk about both things. We can talk about how, less men going to college, less men entering into the workforce, less men growing up without a father figure in the household, less men having access to male role models or male therapists, right? I mean, the therapeutic industry is dominated by women. These things not only disproportionately affect men and disadvantage them, but then it creates men in our society that women are disenfranchised by, right? Women aren't interested in them. Women don't want to date them. They don't want to marry them. And so women fundamentally and absolutely should care about men's issues, just like men should care about women's issues. We should be able to talk about both of these things. And we shouldn't have to preface every single time that we talk about men's issues. Like, there's a lot of this sort of bowing down to the matriarchy or to women or to feminism anytime we talk about men's issues. And I've seen a lot of guys do this, where they'll start talking about men's issues and they'll say, well, and this doesn't mean that women's issues aren't important, and it doesn't mean that we don't care about, and we da. And you have to do this like whole 20-minute song and dance, just sort of making sure that that's sort of said and taken care of and abundantly clear in order for your point to be even heard or understood or cared about. And I think that we're entering into a space and time where we can have both of those conversations, hopefully. And there isn't this constant like reactivity to just talking about some of the challenges that men face socially.
We're thrilled to have BetterHelp as a sponsor for the Mankind podcast. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist for live one-on-one sessions, someone trained to listen, support you, and offer helpful insights. If getting one-on-one support feels like a good direction for you, we invite you to check it out. Go to betterhelp.com/mankind.
I was listening recently, to the latest episode of Richard Reeves being on Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. I know you've been on there as well. I recommend everyone check out that interview. It's brilliant. In fact, we'll put that in the show notes too. Chris was really starting to divulge of how frustrating it is getting labeled a poor man's Jordan Peterson or whatever, because he won't preface things. He'll just say something. He won't do that whole now
Song and
just
dance.
so I'm clear, this song and dance.
Yeah.
And Richard's response was quite interesting. He's like, well, I have no problem doing it. And Chris asks him why. And he goes, well, what we're trying to do here is communicate across lines. We're trying to communicate in a way that allows people to perhaps keep one aspect of them open to hearing this information. And I think that's a lesson that can be taken in from a lot of angles for a lot of people, because some of the most, I'll put it this way, some of my, I believe, most integrated, grounded, and truly loving friends that are like true feminists, like that they've got the tattoo. They're in the cause, man. They've been in it a long time. They've been in the trenches, societally, structurally. They love this movement. They love seeing that men are now, like, men's issues are being addressed. They're going, yes, that is actually what is needed more than anything. It's the fast swing in any direction, which is the challenge. And the feminists I have the greatest challenge with are the ones that have complete unwillingness to sit in that place of discomfort, to hear of the issues of men and boys, right? It's no, we're trying to get to the root of why men and boys behave badly or are struggling in education, in substance abuse, in the justice system. How can we do that if we have to dance around every little topic and not go there and can't touch that? It has to get messy. There's no linear way in which we can come to some form of, I don't know the word, you may have the word, but some form of like just kumbaya.
There's no perfect way of doing it. I like kudos to Richard. I listened to that interview as well. Chris has become a good friend of mine. And, if that's your communication style, wonderful.
Sure.
Richard has to deal with government grants and politicians, and that's part of the game, right? And so good, like do that. Me personally, I'm not interested in that. It's not my communication style. I'm not interested in curtsying every single time I want to have a conversation about men's issues, and sort of kowtowing to individuals that are maybe not even open and receptive to what I have to say anyways, and are taking an automatic stance of defensiveness and hostility towards what I'm even saying. There's a very big challenge in our modern culture and society where, and I haven't labeled this yet, but the core sentiment of it is that we approach other people's issues from a standpoint of, I know better than you. I know what you should be doing. I know how you should be handling this. And you see this in a lot of men's issues. I mean, constantly. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. The majority of the articles that are in there are written by women about men, right? The majority of men's mental health issues or men's issues that are in there, they are articles written about men from a woman's perspective. And, in some ways we have to move away from this notion that, like I said this on a couple podcasts, and some people loved it. Some people were sort of upset by that. But what I said was, we are in the first period of history and time where masculinity and what it means to be a man are largely not being defined by men. They are being defined by women. And the culture has shifted where what it means to be masculine and what it means to be a man and what it means to be healthy as a man and a healthy masculine is largely being dictated by women. And that's a very interesting place to be, because if you're not in the body of a man biologically and have the, testosterone coursing through your body, that's going to be a very different experience. And so we have to kind of take into consideration some of these things that are maybe challenging for the opposing sex to understand. What it is like to have lived as a man and the challenges that go along with that. And there's many different examples of this. We don't even have to touch on them, but there's many different examples of, people that have lived as women that have transitioned to being a man, and really acknowledge how challenging it actually is, how you get treated differently socially, how you get interacted with different relationally. And so it's less about deconstructing the whole system of maleness and saying you need to actually be more female, which is right now has, for like the last 5 to 10 years been the sort of approach, is like we need to deconstruct the whole orientation of maleness, and we need to reconstruct it in a way that is more in alignment with what women say men should be. I think that's a very dangerous thing. And I don't think that there's enough men actually taking a stand and saying, well, hold on. Like, yes, we have work to do as men, unequivocally, undeniably, 100%. We want your feedback. We want your information. It's not to exclude you from the conversation in any way, shape, or form, but it shouldn't be solely on the shoulders of women to tell men how they should act and how they should behave and what it means to be a good man and what masculinity is and is not, what's healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity.
How much are we pigeonholing ourselves if we start looking at these things as male issues, as female issues? Because the calling card for this podcast, ever since we launched it, and I think in a big part for the Mankind Project, is no one's going to tell you what it means to be a man. That's for you to figure out, right? Because when you put that stake in the ground and goes, this is what it means for me to be a man. Like, I'm in a stage right now where I've been sitting in the feminine for a long time, and I am so excited to get back into a providing place. I really am. I was a stay-at-home father for my daughter's first 2 years, and that was wonderful. Hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm ready to work. I'm excited for that sense of pride that comes from money hitting the bank account. And that doesn't define who I am, but it feels good for me right now, right? So I can shift, I can change in that. And I want any man who sits in my men's group or comes into this work to find out what that is for him. So are we perhaps setting ourselves up to fail by just looking at this as male and female when really each of us has such an individual experience in life?
In 2019, the American Psychology Association came out with guidelines on how to work with men. And I'm gonna come around to your question by a sort of like a side door. I'm gonna take a side door into answering your question.
Please.
The APA came out with guidelines on how to work with men, and this got distributed to therapists and psychologists. And the first line item that they started with was defining masculinity. And they defined masculinity as a purely social construct, meaning there's no biological implication, that biology plays no part in your expression of masculinity. And so I think to answer your question is to find yourself in a place where you determine for yourself whether or not you fundamentally believe that biology has any effect on your expression of your gender. And if you don't think at all that biology has any impact on your expression of your gender, then you might go about answering that question differently than an individual that does believe and has felt internally that their biology does have an influence on how they express themselves as a man or as a woman. And the reason why I bring that up is because there are biological differences between men and women. And not to get political, but there just are biological differences between men and women. Yes, the similarities are substantial, right? It's like 99.3%. But the differences are unequivocally important for how we express ourselves as men and as women. And so, a part of this is that there are a subset of challenges and problems that human beings face, finding purpose, finding meaning, those types of things. How the hell do I be happy in life? How do I not let social media drive me crazy? Like, there are just genuine human being issues that we all face. And then there are very specific issues that I believe that men and women face that are different because of our biological imprinting and expression, that have nothing to do with socialization, that have nothing to do with the culture that you've grown up in. And maybe society and culture have accentuated those things, and they make them more problematic, or they downplay them and they make them more problematic. but at its core, your biology does have, in my perspective, a role in that expression. And so I think that we've kind of danced around this notion of we should eradicate biology from the equation. We should eradicate that men and women do have different issues. You know, I don't go through a monthly cycle.
No.
I don't menstruate every single month. I have no idea what that's like. I have no idea the problems that might cause for somebody, and how that might show up in terms of how they express themselves, in terms of the clothes that they want to wear, or how they can work and how productive they can be, or how they can show up in a relationship. And so I do think that we should take those things into account, because those things do matter and they do have an impact. And I think that we've lived in this space of trying to negate those things as a means of eradicating the categories to try and come into a space of unity. You know, it's like the eradication of categories for the sake of unification, of maybe we can find some type of utopian getting along if we just eradicate the biological categories. Well, that doesn't work. It's like sweeping the fire under the rug. It's just the rug's going to go on fire, right? The fire's not going to go out. You're just going to set the rug on fire. And that's kind of what we've done in some ways. Hopefully that is an answer for your question. I'm sure that's maybe a little bit of a spicy take. I don't know, for the Mankind podcast, but people are more than welcome to disagree with me. It's not a problem.
We rather interview people that we disagree with, to be honest with you, because otherwise it becomes a boring circle jerk of just like the same talking points over and over and over again, right? So yeah, no, and I can't think of anything I would inherently disagree with on any of that, right? Because even just in how much you just shared, there's so many threads that could be yanked and pulled that just really continues to prove how nuanced these conversations kind of remain.
Yeah. Can I give you a specific example that might help to sort of color this?
Yes.
Like, I think Richard Reeves has done a beautiful job talking about the developmental delays within young boys versus young girls. And I see this. Delayed. Yeah, exactly. And I see this. I mean, I was delayed. I see this in my son. You know, he's got speech delay. He's very, very smart. He's very active with his body, and he's super, super developed tactically. Like, if you ask him to sprint, that 3.5-year-old is going to sprint. If you ask him to say, you know, an S and an F, it's not going to happen. It's going to be a D and a T, right? And so young boys statistically are going to develop slower than young girls. And we know that, right? Young boys' prefrontal cortex is going to develop later in life. Young boys are going to go through puberty later statistically than young girls. And there are learning impacts, right? There's an impact on that from that biological experience. There's an impact on that young boy's ability to learn. So Richard Reeves, as an example, has talked about what's called redshirting boys, right? In the UK, they like to redshirt boys, which is just holding them back. And I've seen this in a lot of men who have benefited from being held back in school, and that it allowed them to sort of catch up to the development of the young girls. But if we pretend like there aren't biological differences between boys and girls, then we can't take that data and that research into account. And then we continue to underserve boys, and young boys continue to be sort of held back in a way that is detrimental to them long term. Now, some boys obviously don't deal with that, and you know, they're wicked smart super early. My boy's wicked smart. Wicked smart, and they don't deal with that. But we do need to take these things into account, because they are going to determine how we structure our education systems, how we structure our mental health support. You know, I think this is another example that I see all the time is within the therapeutic industry. You know, the therapeutic industry takes a very feminine-oriented approach to support. And that approach is very much about listening and empathizing to the experience of the individual. Men that go into therapy are oftentimes dealing with an intensity internally, whether that's emotionally or psychologically, that they fundamentally do not believe that the therapist or psychologist can support them with. And so what ends up happening is that they go into a therapeutic environment, and what they're met with is an individual that's been trained on listening and empathizing, but not a lot of solutioning and problem solving or skill acquisition. And so a lot of men come into a therapeutic environment and they're listened to and they're heard and they're understood and they get to express. And all of that is wonderful. I'm not negating that. But what they're really looking for is, I feel like I suck at communicating with my wife. And they never get taught how to actually do that tactically. So they get listened to, they get heard, they get emphasized with, but they're frustrated and they feel like therapy and psychology is missing something, because what they're really desiring is something that's more linear and more tactical, and what we would traditionally call more masculine, which is a very skill-oriented skill acquisition of, how do I become competent in this thing? And I see this all the time. And I think that the therapeutic industrial complex is wildly letting down men, because it's not taking into account that men might be different from women and that men might need a different approach. And, this year I put out a training program called How to Work with Men for therapists and psychologists and counselors. And it was wild how many of them came in and didn't realize that this was an approach that they could take with men that would be effective, and then took that back to some of their male clients that they'd been working with for 3, 5, 8 years. We're like, holy crap, I'm actually seeing a massive shift, because a lot of men want to develop competency. And I'm not saying that women don't want to do that. I'm not saying that none of this applies to women. I'm simply saying that for men, this is the lens that we are often looking through, because we get treated differently socially and we get valued different socially. So anyway, those are just 2 examples. Rant over.
Well, and so we have BetterHelp as a sponsor of the show, and I'll give my pro tip, because I went through a couple therapists and just been like, dude, this ain't working, right? I tried different perspective, like try to go for different kind of archetypes based on profiles, and I finally ended up with Rick, good old Rick. Shout out to Rick. And I said, Rick, I need you to hold my feet to the fire. I need you to hold me accountable. I need you. I'm looking for tools. I'm looking for techniques. I'm looking for someone who's going to call me on my BS. Like I sit in a men's circle. I've been in men's work for a while. I certainly haven't dug to the bottom. I'm not claiming to believe that I have, but I need someone who's willing to, every now and then, a touch of a feather lesson is good, and kick me in the balls if I need to be kicked in the balls. he just responded 100%. He just responded with Roger that, and I'm like, okay, cool, we're good.
When you said Rick, I was like, oh yeah, like Rick from Rick and Morty. He's going to take you on some
Morty.
Morty, come on, Morty.
Come on, Morty. I want to call you out, by the way. You said, I said, it's not that women don't want to get tactical. So I'm just,
I did the thing. I did the thing.
We all do the thing, all right? It's all we're all works in progress here. So, Connor, you're a father, all right? And I don't know if you ever went through sleep regression. I know you have a 3.5-month-old, so you're probably in the thick of it right now. And you probably know those 2 p.m. blues kick around, and it's a bit hard to kind of get up and go. Well, this is really, really cool, guys. I want to share with you all about Magic Mind, who's been a sponsor of the show for a while. Many of you have gotten their products. You know that my wife and I are obsessed with these things. My wife more so, because there's never many left by the time the next batch comes around. And so for all of you who tune into the Mankind podcast, there is a new offer from Magic Mind, which is getting 40% off for your first subscription, which is a huge discount. It's tied into Black Friday. This little powerhouse of a shot, Forbes is calling it Silicon Valley's new morning elixir. Joe Rogan uses it, the Kardashians use it, and many different athletes make it a part of their routines. I'm telling you, it is the thing that I need to just get my ass up and moving when, you have that meal at lunch, want to take a nap. It gets me right through the day. And so because of our long-standing relationship with Magic Mind, they want to award each of you with this 40% subscription when you use the code MANKIND40 at checkout. So you can go to magicmind.com/mankind40 to get your hands on one of the greatest things my wife loves to steal from my fridge and that we put into our bodies. So check it out. Links will be in the show notes. So, mate, we've talking about a lot of things here. There are so many threads that we could pull and yank, and this topic is really so huge. I mean, you have dedicated your life to just this one topic and the 1,000 subtopics that come out of it. You cover them in depth on Man Talks. Right now, I just want to kind of hone in a little bit into, so men find themselves listening to your show, reading your book. Fantastic, by the way. I recently was refinishing a dining table, and it was the perfect accompaniment. It was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, and then which is just, that's brilliant too. And then I jumped onto your book, and it was awesome. Really, really love it. So I encourage each of you to check it out. Links will be in the show notes. So men find you, they find other, men's groups, say it's the Mankind Project or other places, and they start doing their work. Right. And you were talking before about this, like learning about the issues. Where did I learn these behaviors? What childhood wounds are impacting how I'm showing up today? But then actually getting in and doing something about it. I've heard it shared before. I really like this. It's like integration, activation. So I integrate the lesson, and then I got to activate it and create different outcomes. What is your approach, man? When you find something in your life, when you've, maybe a sticking point, maybe a behavior that is no longer serving you, what's your approach to actually dive deep, get into it, and then create different outcomes for yourself?
Couple things, and I'll try and just put some frameworks around this that I find to be helpful along the way. The first thing is that our brains are not designed for change. They just aren't. Like we're actually working against our own neurology. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, and they are pattern recognition machines for the patterns that we already know about. So when we look at trying to change a behavior, ourself, a mindset, a belief system, you're working against the system that is inherently in you, right? And that system is trying to keep you in the track that it already knows. So it's trying to keep you in that self-sabotaging oriented behavior. This is why I say that sabotage is not a desire to be out of control. It is a desire to regain control. We sabotage to move back into a pattern that we already know, right? When you sabotage, you are moving back towards something that is familiar to you. You know how you're going to feel when you do it. You know how you feel in the middle of it and afterwards, and the shame you're going to feel. And the whole thing is all mapped out for you. That's known. The thing that I've really tried to curate and cultivate, and I'm going to start a little bit more esoteric and then make my way down tactically, is my relationship to the unknown writ large. Just that, my relationship to the unknown. The majority of men have a deep unconscious fear of the unknown, and they do not want to face it. And our brains have a fear of the unknown. Our brains do not want to go towards what they do not know. So the new behavior, the new relationship, the new way of being, the new way of embodying that, whatever it is, truth, honesty, groundedness, compassion, self-accountability, etc. Those things, because they are unknown, are coded neurologically as a threat. Okay. So I always try and remember whenever I've bumped up against, a new habit that I'm wanting to implement, a new way of being, a new behavior. Like, for example, I just built a deck and a sauna for myself and my wife. And having that be a new pattern is something that's completely unknown to me. It could be something that, I don't bother to engage with. I don't bring into my rituals and my daily routines, or it's simply because it's unknown, or it can be something that I build a system and a routine and a habit around. So the first thing is you have to know that you're probably going to be afraid in some way, shape, or form of the change that you're wanting to make, because your relationship to the unknown gets made manifest. Every single time you want to change, your relationship to the unknown gets made manifest. And what happens for most men is that's where fear, that's where doubt, that's where their inner critic, that voice inside that just starts to shit talk us, comes up really loud. And so for me, it's always a remembering of, oh, my brain and my body don't actually want to do this, right? And this is in myth. There's a point in mythology. There's two archetypes I want to talk about really quick, and then I'll talk about some tactical things that I do. In myth, there's two archetypes that come up whenever we're trying to make change. The first is the archetype of the predator, and the second is the guardian of the threshold. And so the predator is this archetype. It's really the energy of death. It's the energy that is trying to close all the doors and all the roads of change. So anytime that you are at the fork in the road of, light the joint, open the porn tab, pour yourself the whiskey, or don't do that thing and go meditate or do breath work or do yoga instead, that predator archetype comes up inside you and says, don't go down that path. That's scary. You don't know what that's going to look like. Go back to what you know. So that internal predator comes online. And then secondly is the guardian of the threshold. And the guardian of the threshold in myth was really the archetype or the embodiment of testing to see whether or not you had the resolve to really move forward. And a good example of this is in Indiana Jones. I can't remember if I think it's the one where he's looking for the Holy Grail, right? And he gets up to the ledge and he sort of throws or no, he doesn't throw it at that point. He has to take a step of faith, right? The leap of faith out onto the invisible bridge. That is the archetype of the guardian of the threshold. And every single man is going to experience that in big ways, right? Should I leave this marriage? Should I leave this relationship? Should I sell this company? And in small ways when he's trying to implement change in his daily routines, working out, meditating, etc. So how do I combat those things? What do I actually do? The first is journal relentlessly about my relationship to the unknown. I've done a ton of that just to try and understand it. Get a better sense of what it feels like for me. And then secondly, I build patterns. So in the morning, I try not to think of it as like a specific routine that I want to implement. It's more of a pattern that I'm just following. I'm conditioning my brain to follow a certain pattern because our brains love patterns. And the more that we can create a pattern, the more our brain will fall into it. And so you can slowly implement small incremental changes. So for example, if you can't get up in the morning and you're really struggling to do that, you can pour yourself a big glass of water the night before. And you bring that glass of water upstairs to bed with you and you drink half of it so that it forces you to get up in the middle of the night and it forces you to get up in the morning to take a leak. And when you get up in the morning, you drink the rest of it, right? And you just start to do these small incremental patterns that start to shift your behavior, that then start to shift how you relate to yourself internally. So that's just an example. The other thing that I think is really important, and one thing that I really had to focus in on that I think a lot of men need to focus in on, there's two things. One is how a man relates to his intensity internally, because men generally carry around a very large form of intensity inside of them that they do not know how to deal with energetically. That could be the intensity of grief. It could be the intensity of their anger. It could be the intensity of their own depression or anxiety, or for a lot of men, it's the intensity of their own self-loathing and self-hatred. And so for me, that was my intensity. I really didn't like who I was, and so I had to go on this journey of confronting my own inner critic, this dialogue inside that had hijacked my sense of authority. And how we do that in part is by repurposing these parts of ourself. So the best way I can frame this is there's no killing off parts of yourself. This is a very masculine, male-oriented way of doing things, right? It's like, I don't like that's right. I don't like the way I'm going to talk to myself. I'm going to murder this inner critic off. Yeah. What we do is we actually repurpose these parts of ourselves that we are struggling with. We find functionality in them. We think of them as loyal soldiers, and we start to reassign them a new mission. And so instead of having an inner critic that's constantly attacking you and criticizing you and tearing you apart, you can say, okay, I'm going to interrupt that part of me every single time it starts to criticize myself, and force a new pattern of self-recognition. What can I actually recognize myself for? And in doing this, it's kind of like a form of autocorrect. I really love this notion of autocorrect, of like, I'm going to autocorrect myself and interrupt that pattern every single time. Every single time the inner critic comes up, I'm going to interrupt it, I'm going to redirect it, and I'm going to have some type of self-recognition, even if it feels kind of phony or fake, or it feels cumbersome at the beginning, which it absolutely should. If you don't have an inner infrastructure of self-recognition, it's going to feel really fake and shitty and awkward to begin with, because it's foreign and it's unknown and it's something that you haven't done. And so it's a skill that you haven't developed. It's a competency that you haven't worked on. And that's something that you have to do time and time again. These things are repetitions that we have to try and implement over and over and over again to course correct the behaviors or the beliefs, or the self-referencing that we have internally. So that's a bit of a longer explanation, but hopefully there's some examples in there that men can really grasp onto.
Well, there's plenty. And, it's a loaded question, of course. So, journaling about the unknown. So building that relationship. And I'll circle back and ask you about a prompt, of how someone can begin that. But what I'm also taking away from what you're sharing is starting small. Just starting small, like just small, seemingly insignificant, tiny habit changes, or at least create a system or an environment that encourages this change, this behavior change. Whether it's, the water, so you take a leak, right? I know for me, it's accountability buddies to work out. Like they're going to be there, so I better be, right? Gym close out the night before. And the intensity management, like really starting to get to know the man in the mirror. And identifying like, man, okay, so I have this behavior, or I have this propensity to respond or react, or have this inner dialogue, getting to know it. How has it served me in the past? And how is it no longer serving me? So renegotiating kind of that relationship. I heard someone say, man, I'm not slaying dragons. I'm learning to ride the bastards. Right? It's way more fun.
Yeah. How to train your dragon. I think we can consolidate what I said down to, you have to find a way to break your homeostasis. You have to find a way to interrupt your homeostasis. What is the natural state of being that you fall into, right? If your homeostasis in your marriage is, I don't talk about that shit, or I avoid it, or, my wife's upset, I don't engage, then you have to be able to disrupt the homeostasis. If your natural homeostasis is avoidance, can you disrupt that and engage? If your natural homeostasis is anxiousness and love bombing, can you disrupt that homeostasis and hang back for a little bit and not feel the need to text bomb the crap out of somebody, right? So it really is about disrupting the homeostasis, because when you do that, that's the pattern interrupt, that's the behavior interrupt, that's the belief interruption. If you aren't willing to disrupt the homeostasis, no change can occur. And you will find yourself in the territory of the known, which is the same crap that you've always done.
Yeah. Same shit, different day. Right.
That's right.
And the willingness, right? You don't have to be wanting.
That's right.
But willing.
That's right.
To do us. Yeah, man, freaking cold plunges and breath work, dude. Those are the two things. I do them. When will they get easier? Sauna all day, but like those two, when?
Yeah.
So what is an easy, quick and simple prompt to give someone who's beginning their journey with starting to journal about the unknown? I'm really curious about that. And I know we have limited time, so
no, you're good. You're good.
Point.
Yeah, you're good. We can take a few extra minutes if you need. A couple of things that you can go into. I really like open-ended questions, so I call these sentence stems. My book is full of them, but one is just, my relationship to the unknown is. Growing up, the unknown was. So growing up, the unknown was. The unknown has been dangerous or threatening when. I fear the unknown because. And then I would probably go into my parents. Like, where did you actually learn that? I would probably, one of the things that I explored is like, my mom's relationship to the unknown was, my father's relationship to the unknown was or is, right? If your parents are still around, and that will contextualize what it looks like for you. I embrace the unknown when. So these are just some prompts that you can get into that will start to contextualize and sort of like give color to what your relationship is.
Thank you. Very cool. Very cool. There has been so much more excitement and adventure in the gray than there ever was in the black and white. I'm learning this, right? And I understand the importance of the brain sifting things into yes and no and right and wrong and hot and cold and right, these binaries. But really, man, like the real adventure is in the, man, I don't know. It was this yesterday and it seems to be this tomorrow. And I may be wrong in both my assessments of those situations, but hey, here we are in this unique adventure that each of us gets to undertake.
Yeah, and that's part of the purpose of what traditional initiation was supposed to do for young boys and men, is that it put you into quote unquote right relationship to the unknown, so that it wasn't a terrorizing, panic inducing thing. It was something that brought adventure, brought growth, brought depth, brought a type of orientation and sustenance and nourishment that you knew you needed, right? But Richard Rohr, said, unless a man goes on a journey of powerlessness, he will always abuse power. And so powerlessness is the epitome of the unknown. We meet our own sense of mortality and powerlessness when we venture into the unknown. And it's a beautiful thing. And so one of my missions personally is to always see how much I can expand out into bearing more and more unknown. How much unknown can I actually bear? How much resiliency can I develop to not knowing how things are going to turn out? Because otherwise we turn into these kind of neurotic, needing to know, navel gazing, small lifed, confined men that are constricted by our rational minds and are just mentally masturbating all the freaking time, trying to figure out exactly what our life is going to look like. Okay, I'm going to say this and she's going to say that, and then that's going to happen, and then this is going to go, and we plan out our sex and we plan out our conversations, and then there's no mystery, there's no awe, there's no wonder baked into our lives. And so, embrace the unknown and just see if you can develop some tolerance and openness physically in your body, psychologically in your psyche, and notice what happens. Your life will fundamentally change, I promise.
Beautifully said. So, final question. I'm going to dust off the magic wand here. It's been a while since we've pulled out the magic wand. So, Connor, I want to ask you. Here you go. Grab that. See, whenever we get in the esoteric and the mythopoetic, we kind of get to be kids for a second. That's the fun part of this. So you got this magic wand in your hand, and by waving this, you have enacted your mission in life, or at least this mission at this phase of your life. What does the world look like? And how do you exist in that world once you wave that wand?
My answer is probably going to be pretty boring. The world looks like it is, and I'm enacting the mission that I am. And to do anything other than that would be to embrace some type of omnipotence that surely I cannot step into. So I know that is probably pretty boring, but it's just honest, buddy. It's just honest for me. Yeah, that's what I got right now.
No. So it's just to keep doing what you're doing right now.
It's just to keep doing what I'm doing. It's to love my son the best that I can. It's to love my baby girl. Yeah. It's to love my wife. I'm living with my mission and my purpose right now, which is supporting men. And I think the reason why I answered that question the way that I did is, for so long in my life, I tried to control or influence things that were completely out of my power and control. And it drove me absolutely fucking crazy. And I spent so much time, and I have a very active imagination, and I have a tendency, as many men do, towards lottery mindset, lottery orientation. And so if I allow myself to go down the path too far, I'll find myself in a place of, well, how come I'm not having a bigger impact? And if only I could change that part of the world. And it's like, it's been very humbling to just let myself be on the path that I'm on, and to just have this conversation with you, and to know that I'm doing the best that I can in this conversation. And so, yeah.
Thank you. That's a big gift I'm going to take away, because that's my work too. So, and becoming a parent, I think, simplifies things. I don't know if that's been your experience, but I give so many less F's about what's happening out there in the world. I don't mean to say that I'm not tied in and have some skin in the game, but it has come down to my family.
Yes.
Everything comes down to my family. It's so simple now.
Yeah.
And that's been such a gift, because it's previously I mean, we're both very ambitious people. And it was like, I want to achieve all these things yesterday and it's all going to be excellent. Right. And now I want time to slow down. I don't want to get anywhere quick anymore. Because in order for that to happen, my kid all of a sudden is going into first grade.
Right.
And then graduating high school and then out of the house. Like, nah, man, let's just enjoy the ride right now and do the bits we can to give our gifts and serve.
Yeah. Yeah. How do my question is always, how do I grow deeper down into myself and into my life right now versus, because we as men are so externalized, right? I mean, we're so like, I'm living out here. I'm not even in my life. So many men are not even in their life. They're not in their bodies. They're not in their marriages. They're not in their fatherhood. They are out there constantly in their to-do lists, in what needs to happen in the garage, in their business. They're in, the political conversation. All of their consciousness and all of their attention and all of their innate presence and energetic sense of being is hijacked by all of this other shit outside of them. Yeah. And so if I can just grow down into myself and be in myself in this moment right now, I will have done something, hopefully, for my son that I didn't get, and that I think a lot of men have been missing in the world, which is just men who are in themselves and are present with themselves in times of chaos. And I think that's something that a lot of men are lacking and missing.
Well, mate, we could have done this for 10 hours quite easily. And I'd like to say this is an until next time.
Till next time.
Pause to this conversation that we're having today. For men that want to find out more about you, actually, better way to ask this, what is the thing that you're most excited about and that you want people to find you and your work through? How can they find it?
I mean, definitely the book, Men's Work. It's sold tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of copies. It's very quickly becoming like one of the most recommended books by therapists and psychologists to their clients and coaches. So definitely check that out. There's a ton of work in it for you to do. And then just this training, this how to work with men. I've opened it up next year for coaches and counselors and therapists and psychologists, and really teaching people the art and the skill of how to work with men effectively in a way that actually gets results for those men. And teaching about attachment and shadow work, and also the business side of things, like how do you market to men? How do you sell to them? How do you speak to them in a way that actually brings them in the door, without having to be wildly polarizing, which seems to be the hammer that everybody's using right now. It's just like, I'll just polarize the crap out of everything.
So let me guess, lesson 1, rent a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Film an ad.
Do a whole bunch of steroids
Whole bunch of steroids. Find some OnlyFans girls to wrap around your arms when you get.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I have a very different model. It's a slow build and burn, but it's more aligned.
Good. Beautiful, mate. Well, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. This is you've been on our podcast list for a long time. Boyson brought your name up in one of our meetings, and
this has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your hosts, Boyson Hodgson and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.
Hey, it's Boysen here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you. Hey, it's Boysen. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.